For any marketing effort to be successful, we need to start with a solid strategic focus. And in order to do that, we have to understand the situation that a company is facing right at this moment. If we don't understand that, it's very difficult to plan for the next steps. So in this video, we're going to focus on situational assessment of a current company situation. And the way we're actually going to start that is a little bit different. We're going to start with a mission statement. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Mission statements are lame and uninteresting, and they're just there because our PR folks like to put them out there. But they're actually really important. They're important because they align the interests of an entire organization, as well as the marketing efforts of that organization, to a specific single goal. And so what I want to do is spend just a few minutes on a mission statement that should be familiar to all of you. So this is the Tepper mission statement. It reads, "To create value for business and society by providing intellectual leadership, advancing the science and practice of management, and developing ethical leaders to be the agents of change in a world driven by technology and innovation." That's the mission statement as of when I made this video sometime in 2022. And the question we might ask ourselves is this a good mission statement? Does this ground our marketing efforts and our organizational efforts in something that we all agree on? And when we assess that, there's really 4 criteria that we tend to consider. The first is that the statement should be market and not product oriented. We seldom say something like, the mission of Apple is to sell iPhones. I mean, that's not true, right? Sure, they want to sell more iPhones, but that's not their mission. That's not the objective. Their objective is about a market. It's about getting to a set of consumers and doing something for them. And so we want to ask ourselves if a mission of a company and the mission statement of a company is about markets rather than products. The second thing is that it should be focused on a limited number of goals. Too many mission statements say, I want to change the world. I mean, sure, that's wonderful. We all want to make the world better. We all want to make our companies better, but that's just too lofty. And so we might want to ask, is a mission something that is tractable, something that we can actually get our head around? Third, it should be motivating. A mission statement is there in part as a signal to customers and external agents, but it's also there to engage employees. Employees don't wake up excited in the morning to sell more iPhones. They wake up and they get excited for a broader objective, like making the world a more technologically savvy place, or improving the lives of other people, something that actually moves the needle. And so we have to ask ourselves, are mission statements actually motivating? And the last thing is that mission statements should stress major policies the company wants to honor. Mission statements should really be something where every decision that a company makes, they can then reflect on the mission statement and say, is this consistent with what we're saying in our mission statement? Now, I'm not naive enough to think that every company is doing this every single time they make a decision. That's absurd, but that's the ideal. That's the goal that we have. And so the question I want to pose to all of you is this Tepper mission statement good? Does it fulfill the 4 objectives that I laid out for you? And what I'd like you to do in just a moment is pause the video and in the discussion I've set up on Canvas, answer that question. What do we like about this mission statement? What don't we like about this mission statement? And maybe, if you're brave enough, try to write a better mission statement for the Tepper School. So go ahead, pause the video, and give that a shot. Okay, hopefully you were able to do that, and you were able to assess whether this is a good mission statement or not. Now, this is not a course on writing mission statements, but the reason I start with this is because if we have a shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve, then we can design strategy, then we can provide implementation suggestions. But until we have that shared understanding, we're just making stuff up. So assuming we have a successful mission statement, the next step is to assess the environment that we're in. And a very common framework for this is called OHMBA's 3 C's. The way this framework works is that there's 3 components to understanding a situation. The first is the customers, that's who you're selling to. And often it's not just one customer, but it's groups of customers or market segments, and we'll talk about that in another video. Second, you have the company and the competitors. So the company is me, like who am I and what am I doing? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And my competitors are exactly what it sounds like. It's everybody else trying to sell similar products. Now, these 3 C's don't live in isolation. Companies and competitors are working to provide value to customers. And the more value they can provide, the more likely a customer is to actually transact with the company or with one of its competitors. And they compete on something like cost. Now, that's not the only way they can compete, but in general, you're seeing competition among, of course, the company itself and everybody else offering similar products. So what I want to do is go through these three and make sure we understand them. And we're going to start with competitors. Another very useful framework for us in understanding a competitive environment is one that you've probably heard of, so I'll go through it relatively quickly, but it's the Porter's 5 Forces model. And what this says is if you understand 5 forces that influence companies and competition, you could understand what the environment looks like. And so what I'm going to do is go through each one of them in detail. The bargaining power of suppliers is the power that suppliers of raw materials and ingredients have in dictating prices to me, the company. Right? I need to acquire raw materials to produce something, and if there isn't a wide variety of suppliers out there that I can switch off between, then they have a lot of power in dictating prices that I pay. So just as one kind of older example, Starbucks back in 2007 had a real problem. Their profits were being squeezed because the suppliers of their raw materials were limited. And those suppliers were starting to demand higher prices, which then Starbucks was forced to either eat in terms of profit or pass on to customers, which then of course results in lower sales. And so this power that suppliers had really influenced Starbucks' bottom line. And of course in 2022, we know that concentration of suppliers is really problematic, right? Think about the inflationary environment that we're in right now. There's a lot of reasons why that inflation exists, but one of them is a lack of supply. It's the fact that supply chains were disrupted in part due to COVID. And because there weren't a large number of alternatives to supply raw materials from, it really caused bottlenecks in many situations. So for example, if you were an automobile manufacturer, you had a hard time making cars because there was a shortage of microprocessors. And those microprocessors were only produced in one of a few factories in the world. And if you wanted an alternative, well, too bad. You didn't have a choice. And so prices skyrocketed on those. And prices of cars skyrocketed and their availability actually decreased. Had there been a different environment where there were many, many different distributors and manufacturers of these microprocessors, we wouldn't have seen that problem. But in this case, suppliers had a lot of power to dictate availability and price. The next force to consider is the threat of new entrants. That is, how easy is it for somebody else to come into the marketplace and basically duplicate what you're doing? Now, sometimes we have restrictions on this, right? If you have a government patent issued to you, that is a legal license to hold other competitors out of the marketplace. No one else can introduce the same thing because you have a patent on it. In other cases, you just have dominance in a marketplace. Maybe you control the store shelves that a product is being sold on, and it's really hard for new entrants to come in and sell in those environments. And so you've got a limited threat of new entry because you've put in place barriers to entry. Maybe you've developed such strong economies of scale that the cost structure that you're operating on is way lower than a new competitor could come in and actually operate under, which isn't an actual barrier in the sense that they can't come in, but they're going to be more expensive, and so customers won't go to them. And so you have an implicit barrier to entry. And so understanding that will be a strong input to understanding the environment that you're operating in. Now, of course, direct competition isn't the only problem that a company might face. They might face the threat of substitution. In other words, their product becomes obsolete and something else takes over. And there's been many examples of this in the history of marketing and in the history of the world. For example, all of us probably had landlines connected to our homes at some point not too far in the past. But over the last couple of decades, that percentage has decreased dramatically, with many, if not all of us watching this video right now, having no landlines at all and using cell phones instead. So cell phones replaced the landline industry. Travel, business travel is at an all-time low, even adjusting for COVID issues. Why? Because video conferencing has become so ubiquitous. It's unlikely that, for example, Delta Airlines considered Zoom to be a competitor, but it is. Zoom is taking away market share from Delta and all the other airlines because people don't have to fly to get to meetings as much as they used to. And you could think more broadly as well. Think about the automobile. In marketplaces where public transportation and investment in public transportation is increasing, that is substituting away from the need to have a car. And so we might not think of public buses or public subways as competitors to the automobile, but they are, because they take away market share by shifting demand to a different product category. And again, understanding this will help us understand the competitive environment that we're in. The next force to consider is buyer power. It's the ability for a single entity to command so much power that they can actually force their suppliers to lower prices. One of the old jokes is that the best thing that can happen to a product is that it gets sold by Walmart. And the worst thing that can happen to a product is that it gets sold by Walmart. And the reason is, under the framework of Walmart's everyday low pricing approach, they've basically said that if you want to sell into Walmart and have your product sold in a very, very broad way to many, many potential customers, you have to prove to us, to Walmart, that your pricing structure is as low as possible. They will minimize the margin that you can extract as much as they can so they can pass that saving on to customers. And that approach means that even though you might be selling high volume through Walmart, you're not making a whole lot of margin. And Walmart has that tremendous power. So understanding how buyer power exists is yet another facet for us to understand the environment that we're operating in. And the last factor for us to understand is the rivalry among existing competitors. When there's a lot of competition, direct competition, what that tends to result in is a commodification of products and ultimately a price war. When companies are selling virtually interchangeable goods, the best they can do often is just cut their prices. And in response to those price cuts, competitors do the same, and we result in a spiral down to the lowest possible price, and thus a reduction in margins. So understanding how competitive an environment is really critical to us. As a classic example, we can think about AMD and Intel selling microprocessors. Now, they're not the same thing, but for all intents and purposes, they're very, very similar. And so the way that they're able to compete is through pricing. One company lowers the price on their microprocessor, the next one responds, and we go from there. This, of course, results in lower margins for everybody in the environment. And a question you might want to ask in the back of your head is who these price wars affect most, the large players in the marketplace or the smaller ones? So think about that, and we can always discuss it at our synchronous meetings. So understanding this Porter's 5 forces framework really helps us understand the competitive environment that we're operating in. In the next video, we're going to shift to understanding the company using something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, a SWOT analysis.